everyone. Can you all hear me? If you can hear me, just use the Q&A box in the chat or the chat or both together. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the How To webinar. First, some logistic. If you have any question during the session, feel free to use the Q&A box. We are monitoring it during the session, and also we are going to ask questions at the end of the session to the presenter themselves. So stay tuned, and at the end of the webinar to hear the answer to some of your questions. I'm Geraldine Zanoni, aka Gigi, developer advocate at Tableau. So today, we are going to talk about the DataDev mini challenges, and then we are going to talk about the level 3 of these DataDev mini challenges. And you might be wondering, did Gigi get enough coffee this morning? Because she forgot level 1 and 2. And yes, I had 2 coffee already, and I didn't forget level 1 and 2. The reason why you don't see the level 1 and 2, and we are not going to cover level 1 and 2 to this webinars, is because level 1 and 2 are tutorials, follow-along tutorials. So the answer is already online, and you can go ahead. And we'll post also the link in the chat later on, but you can already find the solution online. So I don't think we'll spend time today, because time is valuable, to hear about level 1 and 2, as the answer is online. And if you have any questions on level 1 and 2, you can always email us. The email address is developerprogram@tableau.com. You can email us, and we'll be happy to answer to your question one by one. But it's not relevant to have it today to expand you the solution. But what happened to level 3, guys? Was it too hard for you? Just use the box, the chat to tell me what happened to level 3, because we didn't have any submission for level 3 this time. But you know what? I turn around and I'm like, who can help us and show how to solve level 3? Tisha Rose, of course. She is like the queen of Extension API, and she's the best person to show you how to solve level 3. And I understand it's sunny outside. You have time to meet you with your friends. So I totally get it. It might also be a time constraint. But let me know what happened, or was it too hard? Let me know so we can hear your feedback and improve next time as well. So if you are new to the DataDev mini challenges, let me give you a quick overview. First, so it's been 3 months that we run these fun mini challenges. June is actually the last month we are running the challenges. So if you are on the call and you haven't done any mini challenges, June is the last month where we are running them. We have 18 challenges in total with 3 different levels: easy, moderate, and advanced. So you can do all of 3 or just get started on easy and to moderate. It really depends on your level and your skills. We have 3 different categories: extensibility, automation, integration, and embedding. Again, it's 3 months of challenges, but if you think that we need more or you're excited to get more challenges, let us know. We also want to hear your feedback about these mini challenges. Did you enjoy them? And will you do it again? So during these 3 months, every 2 weeks, we have a new set of challenges to be solved. So as I mentioned, we have different categories and we have different challenges every 2 weeks. The second week of the challenges, you have an API-focused webinar workshop. We already talked about Extension API. We need REST API. And next week, we are going to introduce you to the metadata API if you haven't heard of it before. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we have a how-to webinar like the one you are on today, where we're explaining how to solve the challenges step by step. And learning is one of the key points for these challenges. You are going to learn so much, and all the challenges are use cases, real-life use cases, examples to solve. So if you complete the level 1, you are winning a DataDev sticker pack. If you are winning a level 2, if you are submitting a level 2 and validate the level 2, you're winning a DataDev water bottle, and level 3, a DataDev t-shirts. So you have some swag and also a lot of learning experience doing these challenges. How to win? First, you need to be part of a developer program. I think anyone on this call is already part of the developer program. We send out this webinar is only for developer program members only. But if you have colleagues or friends that want to join the mini challenges, the first step for them is to join the developer program. Then you need to validate the challenge. You can find all the information on the mini challenges page, how to validate them, which step you need to do to validate them. So if you didn't listen to anything I said, just go to this page and you will find all the information, the workshops, the rules, the mini challenges themselves, and also past mini challenges if you're interested in learning more about previous challenges. You can find all the information there. I'm going to paste the URL in the chat as well, so don't worry. So now let's go to level 3. Let's share my screen just to remind you what was level 3. I have it open here. So the level 3 was, I'm from here and I want to go to there. What does that mean? Is when you have 2 points on the map, for example, you have Mauritius and Seattle, and you're selecting that on the map, on the dashboards, you want to know what's the distance between these 2 points. And using Extension API, we ask you to calculate this distance between 2 points selected on the map or on the dashboard. And for that, we have Kisha Rose, developer advocate, one of my colleagues, and Extension API Queen. I think that should be your new nickname, no?
Oh, maybe. I like that.
So let me give you the presenter role. Thank you, Kisha, to do the show level 3 submission and how to solve it.
Sure thing. You guys can see my screen?
Perfect.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, I think I'll actually also do the bonus that you had on that page, which is directions too, while we're at it.
Wow, you really
Yeah.
own this title.
So 2 weeks ago, I was here. We did a deep dive into extensions, and we went over all of the nitty-gritty details, all the resources that you need to get started. We talked about creating the T-Rex, setting up the debugger, all of that. I'm not going to go into that today since we did that 2 weeks ago. If you want to look into more details, you can take a look at the video we have posted. But today, just going to go through like a how-to on how I would do this challenge. So let's take a look at what we have here. So I've got this map of the United States, and unfortunately I don't have Mauritius in the Superstore dataset, so we're gonna have to just stick to the US for today. I know. You gotta get me an international Superstore, you know.
Next time.
Yeah, next time we'll open up some chains in Mauritius. But what I can do here is I can grab 2 cities. So let's say we'll do Seattle here, and we'll just grab one of these cities down here. We'll do San Francisco. And then once I select these 2 cities, you'll see on the right in the extension, we get the distance in kilometers, as well as some turn-by-turn directions. So this is what we're going to look through today. Now I've already built this out, so I want to just do a quick how-to. We're going to go through the code that I built just to show you how you could achieve something similar. All right, so let's take a look at the code here. Now this is using Glitch, as you know, one of my favorite websites to use. You can write your code and host it at the same time. I'm going to be using the same project here, but I'm going to walk you through everything I did step by step. So first, let me just comment out all of these different things, and then we'll go through what each of them does. Let's just get rid of all of this stuff and all of this stuff here as well. Okay, so we're starting from scratch. If you were to go to glitch.com, you can start your own project by taking a look at New Project and then going to Hello Express. I'm using the Node.js version today with Express because I have a key that I want to keep secret, but we'll get to that later. Okay, so in the mini challenges, Gigi gave a great hint of using Bing Maps. So I've gone ahead and I've created a key. I signed up for an account With Bing Maps, I've got my key. I'm not going to show that to you because I want to keep it secret. And then I also take a look at the calculator route link that she posted there on the mini challenges page. And we can use this calculator route API to look for directions, distance, and some more information between 2 points, actually multiple points as well. So this is the API I'm going to be using today to actually get the information that I want. So the first thing I normally do whenever I am starting any project is I try and think about what are the steps that I want to accomplish in this project. So for this one, first thing I want to do is be able to actually get 2 points from Tableau, right? So I want to get selected cities from a Tableau map. I also want to be able to get the distance between 2 points. And then I also want to get the driving directions between those 2 points. And finally, I want to be able to actually just display those things in the extension. So what I'm going to do is actually going to rearrange these in the way that I think about going about it. So the first thing I'm going to do is work on the display. Then I'm going to work on getting the data for the distance and the driving directions between those 2 points. And then finally, we're going to bring in the Tableau Extensions API so that that data can be driven based on my selection. So let's start off with just displaying the information. So if you take a look here on my index page, where you have this scaffolding, I'm going to go ahead and just show you what this page looks like on the right-hand side. So right now we just have this really plain and simple distance and directions here. And what do I want to do here? Let's see. I first of all want to make sure I'm bringing in my scripts. Let's make sure those are on. Let's uncomment that. Here we go. And the first thing I want to do here is bring in the from and the to. What cities were selected? I want to see what I selected just to validate that I'm looking at the correct cities. So I'm going to have a paragraph that says from, and this will say something like from Seattle, for example, right? Something like that. And then we'll have something here that says to, and this will just say to whatever the next city is. Let's say it's LA. Now, each of these paragraphs have IDs. So I've got ID from, ID to, which means later on I can use jQuery or just JavaScript in general to reference these paragraph elements. And I can fill in this text dynamically based on my data. I also want to have a dynamic element for distance. So I've got that here. This will show something like 100 kilometers or something like that. And finally, I've got a div here for the directions. This is going to have a list of paragraphs, things like turn left, turn right, etc. So I can use these placeholders to fill in my information later on. Now, what's going on with my style sheet? Not sure, but I'm going to ignore that for now. So we've got display information. We have our scaffolding or a skeleton set up. Once we get the data, we can then fill in with the actual things that were selected. Cool, so that's done. Next, let's talk about getting the distance between 2 points. So I want to not only get the distance, but also the driving directions. And using this calculator route API, if you look at the route data, which is what we get back from this API. There's a lot to scan through here, but if you see we can get the travel distance, we also can get the route. So we have different legs for the route. So I only need to make one call to this API, and I can get both the distance as well as the driving directions. So I don't want to keep making the call or making the call twice. I want to make the call once and then parse out that data to fill in each piece. Now remember, I need to use my Bing Maps Developer API key, and I have that stored right now in my environment variables. And actually, I can even show you what this looks like because you can only see half of the key. So, but this is what I have, Bing Map key. You can call this whatever you like, and then you would have your environment, your API key with that as well. So later on my server, I can call Bing Map key and use that in my requests. So instead of having two different requests, I'm going to start here with this function called getData. And this is going to send my from city and my to city back to my server, which has access to my API key, to send the request out to Bing Maps. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this function is doing. All right, so my getData function, it needs to take a from and a to, right? Where are we trying to get the distance and the directions for? Then I'm going to use jQuery post. So if you take a look at jQuery post, just a shorthand for the typical AJAX function, but you can send requests over HTTP, and the post method just makes it really simple to do so. So you can send it to a particular endpoint. In my case, I'll be sending it to my own server. You can send some information, and you can also use a function that will be used once the data gets sent back. So taking a look at this post, I'm sending this information to /getData. Now, getData is an endpoint in my own server. Okay, so let's just start there. I'm going to send from and to, and we're just going to console log whatever data we get back. Now this console log will show up here in my developer tools. Go ahead and clear that out for us. A little smaller. And we're going to go ahead and test this function out. So let's go ahead and run getData. And we're going to say from Seattle, Washington to, let's do LA. Okay, we got the full city names there. All right, calm down, glitch. There we go. So we're running this function, but nothing is gonna happen yet because there is no get data endpoint on my server. So this is being sent to nowhere. So let's set up the get data endpoint on my server down here. So now we've got this new get data endpoint. So let's bring that open. And you can see we're going to get a response here, or sorry, a request from the client side. Now, before I can do anything with this request, I need to tell this application or tell my application here what to expect in the request. So jQuery post, it sends URL encoded data. So I'm going to say, okay, Express, make sure you're parsing out the body as it's being sent as URL encoded data. So now that I have that, I can take a look at what request I'm getting. Now, this request, this console log for the request body is not going to show up in the client-side console. This is server-side code, so we need to look at the logs that are happening on the server. Now we can see whenever I refresh this page, since I'm running that query, I'm getting the from Seattle, Washington to Los Angeles. That's the same body that I put in this request that I'm sending to get data, my endpoint here. So now that I have this request body, I can set up a variable called from that will pull out the from data, and same thing with to, that'll pull out the to, so that's Los Angeles. And I can now start to put together the URL that I need to get the data from Bing Maps. So if we take a look at this documentation page, they have a great sample URL for you to use. And it shows you all of the fun, cool things that you can use with this API. We don't really need much of this for today's demo, but I just copied this and filled in my own points. So let's take a look at this. We've got the URL base, looking at routes, and then we have waypoint 1. And this is going to be using the from city that I have in my request body. I then have waypoint 2, And again, we're now going to use the to city that I have in the request body. Last but definitely not least, we need to include the API key so we actually can get an answer from Bing Maps. Remember, I have Bing Map key set in my environment variables, and I can access that using process.env for environment .Bing Map key. And again, you can name this whatever you want. So now that I have my URL structure set up correctly, I can actually go ahead and fetch the data from that URL. Now, there's a couple ways you can use, you can do fetching in Node.js. My preference right now is just to use node fetch. We used to use requests, but requests recently got deprecated. I like node fetch, but honestly, anything will do. And based off of node fetch, you can take a look at their documentation, and you'll see that very simple JSON example right here. You take a look at fetch, you pass in the URL, you then decide how you want to parse the data that comes back, in this case JSON, and then you can do whatever you like with that JSON data. So I have that set up right here. We're going to fetch the URL, which I've already crafted above. I'm then going to say, hey, that data is coming back as JSON, so can you parse it as JSON? And then once I have that JSON data, I can send my response back to the client side with that data. And if you're sneaky, you've already seen that on the client side now, I am receiving that data and getting this console log. Right? So now I actually am getting data back from the server. Let's go ahead and close the logs for the server. My endpoint is fully set up. Don't need this console log anymore. And whatever I send to my get data endpoint from the client side will now respond with the directions and the distance from Bing Maps. Okay, so we're done with the server side. Oh, my CSS decided to join us again. Not sure what happened there, but glad that the formatting is back. So now that I have this data, I'm going to have two separate functions to parse the distance and the directions. But before I continue, I'm just going to take a quick pause to take a look at the Q&A and see if there's any questions or going through here. It looks like we're all good. Again, remember, if you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A, and I'll make sure to look at them as I go or at the end as well. All right, so now that we have the data, again, I only need to make one call one time. I can then have two different functions that parse out that same data into distance and directions. So let's start with directions here. I'm going to go ahead and start using this one, and we'll turn on our function down here for parse data. Now, if we take a look at this data we're getting here from Bing Maps, there is a lot going on. If you take a look at this page, which shows you all the things that you get with the route, you'll see that there is a lot of stuff. It just goes on and on and on. And it's not exactly the best organized here on this page, I will say. So we're just going to go through the response, and I'll show you what I did to find all the details that I needed for distance and directions. So here at the top level, we have these resource sets. And within this resource sets is an array of resources. And within that array, we have our actual information. So there's an array called resource sets. Within that, we have another array of resources. And then the first item of that array actually has the information about the route between these 2 points. So first you can see we're getting the distance as kilometers, we're getting the duration as seconds, right? Some top level information. What we're looking for is the travel distance. And we can see here that between Seattle and LA, it's about 1,800 kilometers. So I'm going to pull out travel distance by using the path resource sets, then the 0th item, resources, 0th item, and then travel distance. And you can see that here with our distance that I've got this variable. And if I console log distance, you'll see we're pulling out the 1825 for the kilometers there. So all I need to do now is replace our placeholder of 100 kilometers with the actual distance. Here I'm going to be using jQuery again because it's just a simple framework that you can use. And I'm pulling in distance. Now this distance, hashtag distance, refers to the distance ID over here, this particular paragraph. And you'll see I'm already getting the correct kilometers to show up here. Just to break this down, I took the distance and then I used math.round to just round that up to the nearest whole number. And then you can use toLocale_string to actually add the commas. Or if you're in a different part of the world, maybe you add a period to show thousands. It'll add, depending on where you're located, the correct punctuation there. And then I just added a space km to show that this distance is in kilometers. All right, so part one of getting the distance looks good. Let's take a look now at looking the directions. So go ahead and uncomment my directions here. And notice that both of these functions did take data as an input. So we're passing that data from the server side. Now let's take a look back at our data here. Actually, I do want to still console log that so you guys can see this. Let's dig back into this list. So we know it's in resource sets, 0th, then resource sets, then that first item. Then we have this route legs array. The first item of this array has all of the information for the actual route. So start points, end points. Again, we see the travel distance there again. But I'm specifically interested in, let me just make this a little bit bigger, itinerary items. So itinerary items is where you're going to find the turn-by-turn directions of how to get from one point to the other point. Each of these include things like the compass direction you'd be facing, what exit you're looking to take, things you might see if you're looking at a GPS and getting those turn-by-turn directions. If I open up one of these itinerary items, we'll see we have this instruction object, and this is where we can find the exact text of what the direction is. So within our itinerary items, we have an array of instructions, and then within the instruction item, we can get that text. So the first thing I did was just to pull out the itinerary items array as its own variable. So I'm just pulling out itinerary here. So let's take a look at that. Let's clear this. And now you see we're getting just that itinerary. It's a little easier to work with itinerary instead of trying to work with this whole data dot resource sets dot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now that I have this array, I can go through and say for each item in this array, pull out the instruction text. So for each item here, we're going to pull out the instruction.text. So I'm going to say for every step of this itinerary or for every item of this array, we're going to use jQuery again, and we're looking at our directions element now, and we're going to append a paragraph with the text in between it. And here already you can see I'm now turning these instructions, let me show you here one more time, into little paragraphs to display in the extension. So here's our route legs. It's so far down in here. There's a lot of stuff. So first one right here, you can see is head east on James Street. But I still see turn left. Why is that? Well, we had our placeholder there. But not only do we want to get rid of the placeholder, we want to make sure we're clearing out any directions if we change the to and from city. So you'll notice we have this first instruction here to actually empty out whatever you see in directions before populating it with the instructions. So again, comment that out. And now we're not seeing my placeholder text and we're only getting the correct directions. All right, so we've done these 2 points in my steps here, can get rid of that. The next thing to do is to actually populate these 2 cities based off of selections in Tableau and not just my hard-coded Seattle and LA cities here. Before I go into that, I'm going to take a quick pause. Just going to check in on the chat and the Q&A. Oh, you guys are pretty quiet today. No questions. I'm going to take that as a compliment. I'm just explaining things so well you don't have any questions. Not sure if that's the case, but again, if you have questions, feel free to throw it in the Q&A there. Okay, so now we want to move into Tableau and make sure we get these points from our map. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure we actually are initializing Tableau. So we're going to go ahead and initialize Tableau down here. And I'm now going to swap over to our Tableau view. Don't need to look at this in Glitch anymore. I want to see it show up here. So I'm going to reload page, and you'll see we're getting that exact same thing we were getting on Glitch earlier. We still have our placeholder text, and we're still automatically doing it for Seattle to LA. Now I have my debugger open here, so I can see the console log being spit out to us here as well. And now I'm going to think about how I actually want to get this data. So what we want to happen is whenever we click on a city on our map, we want the extension to be alerted and listen for those selections. So what we want to do is actually set up an event listener. So whenever someone clicks on the worksheet, we're listening to those clicks, and when we get exactly 2 cities or 2 marks selected, we then want to run the API call to get the distance and the directions. So go ahead, let's set up our event listener here. So let me zoom in a bit too. I didn't think about that earlier. First thing you want to do is grab all of the worksheets that are on our dashboard. And you can find this path from Tableau all the way down to worksheets within the Extensions API reference material. So here's for an example, you can get the worksheets here. It will show you all of the things you need to do to set up your extensions. Once I have this list of worksheets, I can pull out a specific worksheet by name. So again, if you take a look at the reference here for worksheet, you can see that name is one of the properties. So I can use that to pull out the specific worksheet I'm looking for. Now, in this case, we only have one worksheet, but it's still best practice to try and pull it by name instead of, let's say, just pulling the first one you find. So this is going to say worksheets, and .find is just a plain JavaScript function, and I can say return to me any the first worksheet where the worksheet name is equal to map. And you can see that I have map as the name as my worksheet on the dashboard. Next, we want to set up a event listener once we have that worksheet. So I can say worksheet.add event listener. Now we are specifically looking to listen to mark selection changes. And I can find that particular name by looking at the add event listener reference here. And you can see we can choose an event type. And these are the 4 event types you can choose. In our case, we're looking for mark selection changed. The next piece that you need to pass into the add event listener method is a function to run whenever something gets clicked. In this case, we're going to use get selection. So let me go ahead and uncomment my get selection function here. And let's just alert something was clicked. Okay, let's test that out. So if I reload here, we've initialized the extension. If I click on a city, we get the alert that something was clicked. Now the question is, well, what was clicked, right? So not only will we get an alert when things are clicked, we also will get an alert when things were deselected. So if I deselect, something was clicked. So we only want to make sure we're running our distance and directions function when we have 2 and exactly 2 cities selected. So let's see how we can do that in the code here. So the first thing we need to do is actually get the data for what was selected. If we take a look at the event here for marks selected event, you see that we have these properties like what worksheet was selected, but we also have this method called getMarksAsync. And this will return to you a collection of marks based on what was selected. Now you'll notice that this is an asynchronous function. So I'm going to leverage the async await pattern to make sure I'm waiting on that function to return the data before I continue and try and parse it out. So here we're going to wait for that data from our getMarksAsync call. I'll go ahead and console log data, and we'll take a look at it. Let's see what we get. Let's reload. And if I select Seattle, you see we get this array of data. So what's going on in here? Well, we have data within data, which is an array, because we can have multiple data sources. In this case, we only have one, so we see we have this 0th item here. And then we're going to get a series of columns and data. So the columns describe the information about the different fields. So for each, we have the field name, what type of field or data type it is, and we have an index. So if you take a look at the lineup here, we start with city and state, then we have like profit and sales, and latitude and longitude. Down here in the data, we actually see the information for the mark selected. So you see that Seattle, Washington matches up with city-state, Seattle matches with city, United States matches up with country, right? We're matching these up. So for each of these items, we want to know the index of the column we're looking for so we can find the data that matches. If I was looking for sales, for instance, I would find what index is happening for sales. In this case, it's 5. And then I would look at the 5th position here, or the 5th index position, and I can get the sales information. Let's grab LA here as well, and you'll see we get another output from our data. And this time we have the same exact set of fields in columns, but you'll notice we now have 2 items in our data array. One is for Seattle, right, and its related information, and one is for LA. So we first want to make sure we have at least 2 cities selected. Then we want to find the information for city plus state. What index is that at? Using that index, we then want to pull the city names. Now, just to let you know, city plus state is a calculation that I have just to make this process a little bit easier. And all it does is concatenate city and state together with a comma, just to make it a little easier to pull that information in. Okay. So knowing that, let's take a look at the code and see how we can do this. So first things first, I'm going to pull in the array of data that shows the multiple cities that were selected. So we're pulling in this array that has 2 marks, Seattle and Washington. I'm then going to check to see if the length of that array is equal to 2 exactly. That tells me we have exactly 2 cities selected. If that's the case, then we can move forward and get the data for the distance and the directions. Now we need to find the index for city and state. So I'm going to look in columns. Remember, we have this array here. I'm going to find the field name that equals city plus state. In our case, it's the first one here with an index of 0. But this can change, right? So this might shuffle up on you. So you want to always find the index at that current moment and then use that index to pull in the information. So this is just going to pull 0, and I can say, okay, for each of these items in the data array, pull the 0th item and its value. So from here, we can pull the 0th item and its value for our from city, and the same thing here for the to city. Just to reiterate, because there's a lot of numbers and indexes going around, from is taking cities, the 0th position, and whatever value we need to find for the city name. So here we've got our data, 2 marks, Seattle and LA, and we're pulling in the 0th position, so Seattle, and then we're pulling in Seattle, Washington. For the 2 city, we're looking at the city that's in the 1st position. It's weird to say. In this case, it's LA, and we're pulling in the 0th index item here to pull in the city name. And we also want to get that value. Now that we have the from and to cities, we can go ahead and again use some jQuery here to populate the from and to text. Remember, those are at the top here, just showing what cities were selected. So I'm going to just say from and to, and I'll add in the from and to cities. And most importantly, instead of running the get data function with our hard-coded cities, we can now get rid of that and use the from and to cities that we have selected from the map. Okay, now let's go back and bring it all together. Let's reload. And you'll see if I deselect, actually, let me show you this too here. Let me just console log. Selection. Let's reload that. You'll see if I deselect, we are still getting that event trigger. And you'll see if I get the selection here, but nothing is happening, right? Nothing is coming in because I don't have 2 cities selected. If I select Seattle, again, we got a second selection, but again, I only have 1 city selected, so I'm not going to get any information. Once I now select a different city, let's do Chicago. Aha! Now we're getting the Seattle to Chicago from and to show up. We see the distance here of 3,000 kilometers, and we're getting our turn-by-turn directions. And yes, it will take you a long time to get to Chicago. I can then select other cities as well. If I want to, let's say, deselect Chicago, maybe I'm going to go to my hometown, Rochester, which is even further, 4,000 kilometers, and you get those directions turn by turn. All right, so that completes the extension as far as what we did today. Of course, there's a lot that you could do to improve upon this. If you take a look at the code here, let me go ahead and paste this in. You guys can take a look at this code live. If you want to remix it yourselves, you can also do that as well. There you go. But if you take a look at the README, there's some suggestions here on things that you can do to improve this. So for example, maybe you could add a configuration pop-up so your end users could actually try and set the city and state fields dynamically so that they're not hard-coded. You can also maybe try and do multiple routes. Right now, we only have it for 2 cities. Maybe you want to add multiple positions for multiple cities. So it's a couple of different things you guys can try out on your own if you want to take this to the next level. Let me go ahead and check in on the Q&A again in the chat. I
I
think we're
have some
good.
questions for you.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So we have a question, and on Bing API, it looks like, do you have any advice for but for someone that is just starting with a new API, hard to familiar himself with a new API, getting started with a new API that they might not be familiar with?
Oh, great question. Yes. So this, you mean the first thing you need to do, of course, is take a look at the documentation. It took me not too long to set up my account. And once I did that, you just kind of go through and take a look at their samples. So the first thing I did in this case, they have a sample right up front, which is great. I love that. And I copied their sample and I just typed in my own waypoints, copied this, and I put it in my browser and I just started playing around with it. I put in different cities. I tried, did I need to put the state in there? I tried, just different positions. So just trying different things. A great tool to use with a new API is Postman as well. I absolutely love using Postman. It makes it very, very easy to try out different APIs, and you can also actually spit the code out as well. So let's say you're trying an API and you've gone through and you set it up just how you want, there's a button you can push in Postman, and you can choose from a plethora of different scripts and different types of languages to spit out the code to use in your project. So things I would say is look at the documentation, try out their samples, use Postman to test different API endpoints. That's a great way to just start with a new API.
Thanks, Kisha. I also really like your approach. I just want to highlight that, like how you first call the API and make it work with sample values and then plug it into the extension API once you have the skeleton ready.
Yes, yes. It makes it so much easier to start with like different chunks, like bite-sized pieces. And it's like, well, we know we're going to get the Tableau data, like that's fine, but like let's set up the API first, make sure that that's all running smooth, and then plug in your data. Yeah, I tend to do that in general.
Make it more dynamic.
Yeah.
We also have a question and say this kind of information, especially for the direction, they say that they want to use it on mobile. Is the extension working on mobile as well?
Um, so yes and no. So I will say we didn't do very much testing on mobile, but it depends on the extension. So simple extensions like this one probably will work just fine. Some of the things that are using some of the features that you don't get in mobile, of course, aren't going to work. So it just depends on the extension. But in general, yes, extensions do work on mobile. I have tested it myself. I made a fun little geocoding extension, which you could use to like figure out where you were based on your mobile Latin long. So it definitely can work. It just kind of depends on what the extension does and what features are available in the mobile app.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's it for questions. Again, if you have any questions, that's your time. Use the chat, you can inbox, we can ask Kisha a question live. I mean, I guess you're always really clear. Thank you again for the presentation and for teaching all of us how to build this extension.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
So this session is recorded, and Kisha already posted the link to the Glitch project, but we're also going to post it on YouTube as well. I posted the playlist with all the previous recording as well. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Kisha, again for coming and being with us today. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Sure. Yeah. Take care.